Hello there everyone, nubkeks here, and in today's video we're looking at the monk class in Shadowlands. Is it any good? We're going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter than the other ones in this series as well. I've been talking far too much, we're going to try to keep it shorter. Just before we dive in though, I do want to point out that the weak auras for the monk actually have updated since the ones you're going to see in this video, but they are available on my Patreon. They're there for free for anyone. It's just like a little cross-promotional thing for me. But yeah, you can just go and grab them if you want them. The place I want to start this video, of course, is with the Covenant abilities, the new big flashy abilities coming in Shadowlands. How are they looking for the monk, and what choices are you probably going to be leaning towards? The Curian ability is Weapons of Order. This is a 2-minute cooldown that gives you a 30-second buff, giving you a nice chunk of extra mastery. Then it has a different effect for each of the different specs, which will affect the rotation a little bit. Effect. For the Brewmaster's Keg Smash, has its cooldown instantly reset, and then Keg Smash will apply a stacking damage taken increase for 8 seconds. That goes up to 5 times, so that's okay. For Mistweaver, it instantly resets Essence Font, and it makes Essence Font heal allies when you start the channel and end the channel, which is a nice little bit of extra raid healing. And then for Windwalker, this one has been reworked since the last time we looked at it. This makes Rising Sun Kick reduce chi cost by 1 for 5 seconds, and Blackout Kick reduces the cooldown of affected abilities by an additional 1 second. So that's Rising Sun Kick and Fists of Fury. So it just overall increases your damage output during that time. So Weapons of Order, I think, isn't too bad. You know, this is going to work in nearly every sort of content. It's going to be very universally applicable for basically all of the monk specs for the most part. I will say that the effects for the individual specs aren't the most exciting things in the world. They're nice little perks, but they're not going to blow your mind away. But I think this is a reasonable choice. It's not too bad. The Venthyr Fallen Order is a whopping 3-minute cooldown ability, but it provides an awful lot of burst. It's going to open a mystic portal for 24 seconds, and every 2 seconds it's going to summon in a spirit that will mirror your monk specs, and those spirits will hang out for 6 seconds. You'll get Fallen Ox Adepts, which are going to do Breath of Fire. They're Brewmasters. Fallen Cranes, which are Mistweavers, which are going to heal targets with Enveloping Mist, and then you're going to get some Windwalker monks, Fallen Tiger Adepts that are going to do some Fists of Fury. The nice thing about this, and you guys really pointed it out, and I hadn't considered this initially, is that this is amazing for PvP. Really good for PvP. I'm not a massive PvP player myself, but you can see the appeal. You press the button, the portal is there, and it's just going to do a lot of damage and a lot of healing. And even if you're stunned, like as a Mistweaver monk, you get stunned, doesn't matter. You're still going to have those Fallen Crane Adepts zip in and start healing and helping you stay stable. So I think that's pretty awesome. It's a big burst cooldown, very strong in PvP. Again, this is also going to be very good in nearly all sorts of content, though it does come with the 3-minute cooldown, which is its big downside. The Necrolord Bone Dust Brew is another intriguing one that has different interactions with the different monk specs. This is a 1-minute cooldown. You're going to throw a brew from the bones of your enemies at the ground, so it's a ground targeted ability. It's going to debuff the targets for 10 seconds. Your abilities will have a 35% chance to affect this target a second time at 35% effectiveness as shadow damage or healing. Essentially, it's about a 12% DPS increase or 12% HPS increase. For Mistweavers, additionally, your mastery is going to not proc twice, but it's going to proc an additional chunk of healing on targets affected by Bone Dust Brew. I do feel that's a little bit awkward to get on the players you want it to as Mistweaver, but you can certainly make it work in bigger group scenarios. For the Brewmaster, this one is very strong. Tiger Palm and Keg Smash will reduce the cooldown of your brews by an additional 1 second when striking enemies with Bone Dust Brew active. This one is super good. Your brews are your core active mitigation rotational abilities. Getting those back sooner is very powerful. And Bone Dust Brew itself is a brew, so you reduce the brew with your brew to get more brews, which is good. And for Windwalkers, Spinning Crane Kick will refund 1 chi when striking enemies with Bone Dust Brew active. So this is really almost entirely a multi-target and AoE scenario ability there. So not the best for Windwalker, I would say. So overall, Bone Dust Brew, this stands out as being exceptionally strong for Brewmaster because it just ties into their core survivability toolkit so well. It synergizes so incredibly well, but I feel this is an awful lot less appealing for the other 2 monk specs. And then finally we have the Night Fae ability, Feline Stomp. This is my personal favorite from just an aesthetic and a gameplay perspective. It's going to be the one you're going to see in nearly all of the footage here in this video because I like it so much. It has been reworked slightly from time to time as well. This is a 30-second cooldown. You strike the ground, expose a Feline for 30 seconds. It does a chunk of nature damage to 5 enemies that you hit with the Feline, and it also will do a nice little chunk of healing to 5 allies within 30 yards. So you don't actually need to hit the allies with the Feline to get the healing, which is nice, because that would be a little bit awkward to maximize both aspects of that. For Brewmasters then, it is going to also ignite them with Breath of Fire. For Mistweavers, it is going to heal 5 allies with the Feyline that are in the Feyline with an Essence Font Bolt. So for them, it is actually important to hit this onto your allies. And for Windwalker, it's going to do a big chunk of damage to enemies, 5 enemies caught in the Feyline, which is cool. And then on top of that, your abilities have a 6% chance to reset this thing. So you can build these cool glowing blue trees all over the ground and set up your own space. They grow in random directions. I think I wiped our dungeon group in the footage you're seeing at least 2 times by pulling a mob pack we weren't supposed to with a Feyline that grew in a way I wasn't thinking about. So this one has some danger to it. This one to me is definitely the most fun. Obviously, this is going to shine in AoE, right? This is about AoE damage on a short cooldown, a short, essentially a rotational damage ability for AoE, which means it's going to be great in Mythic Plus. It's going to be great in raid fights where there's lots of mobs, but definitely going to fall off quite a bit in PvP, and it's going to fall off quite a bit in single target raid bosses, which is a problem. That's definitely a problem, but this looks incredible. It's fun to play with. The resets are fun to play with. So yeah, we shall have to see. If I was to choose a Covenant ability for the Monk right now, and was going to stick with only one, I think I would probably go with Venthyr right now. Just because it's going to be powerful in PvP, in single target raid bosses, in AoE raid fights, in Mythic Plus dungeons. It's going to be powerful everywhere, and it's a simple click it and forget it ability. I find it the least interesting to play with, and that's a problem. But the thing is that it simply works almost everywhere. And if I was going to main Monk, that's what I would be looking for. Diving into Brewmaster Monk, what is going on with them though? How are they looking for Shadowlands? And the great news is that Brewmaster Monk looks to continue its trend from BFA of being an incredibly potent and very, very versatile tank. The really nice thing about Brewmaster Monk is their core active mitigation, their core ways of preventing themselves from taking damage. And this has actually been improved substantially from BFA. The core mechanic for Brewmasters to prevent damage is stagger. Instead of taking all of the damage of any given hit up front to the face, they'll actually stagger a portion of it. They turn it into a damage over time effect that will slowly chip away at their health. And this makes it very, very easy to heal the Brewmaster Monk. They're never going to just die in a second by accident when they're caught, with their shield blocked down, as it were. But they're always going to, your healers will have time to stabilize you, to react. You will have time to react to things. And that makes them extremely strong. They are basically the strongest raid tank for nearly the entirety of BFA because of stagger. Now, the active buttons that actually tie into making stagger work, these are what have been changed for Shadowlands. So in BFA, you had Iron Skin Brew. This was on a charge system, and you drank the Iron Skin Brew, which made your stagger be better. It was rather dull, though. This also shared charges with Purifying Brew, where you could remove some stagger from yourself, essentially get rid of those dots when the dots got very powerful. The big problem with this was that essentially you were just pressing Iron Skin Brew all the time, and then you only really used Purifying Brew whenever you had extra charges left over from the Iron Skin Brew. There wasn't really much gameplay going on there. So in Shadowlands, Blizzard said, well, okay, you know what? Screw it then. Let's just get rid of Iron Skin Brew, and let's just make that thing passive. It works passively, you don't need to worry about it. And now you have 2 charges of Purifying Brew, so you get to think about when you want to remove your stagger. And then you've got a new ability, which is essentially the old guard ability from way back in the day returning, which is called Celestial Brew. And Celestial Brew gives you a really powerful shield, though it is on a fairly large cooldown. But yeah, this is just incredible. You feel so powerful, you feel so strong when you've got that Celestial Brew up. And the Celestial Brew itself, the shield will be more powerful based off of how well you were using your Purifying Brew leading up to it, which is, I think, a really fun little gameplay loop. It makes Brewmasters a very reactive tank, actually, and a very forgiving tank. You have time to look and see, oh, I've got a lot of stagger building up here. I'm going to purify it right now. Cool. Or again, your Celestial Brew, you can use it when you're on low health to just completely save yourself. You can use it to deny big hits. You can kind of use it whatever way you want, but it's very easy, I think, to succeed as the Brewmaster. You're not going to be living on a knife's edge ever, which is, I think, one of their big strengths. On top of that, they have great utility too. You've got the Ring of Peace, you've got your Ox statue to taunt dudes, and of course you've got Roll and Transcendence for really powerful movement abilities. On top of a bunch of other stuff as well, but certainly from what my testing found, I felt that kiting mobs, when you're low on health, when your healer's in trouble, and you can kite mobs around, I felt like the Brewmaster toolkit in dungeons really, really played into that. so much better than the other tanks. It just felt natural, it clicked, and I had a lot of answers. So you could do some very, very fun plays and some very creative plays, which really made them stand out for me as a tank. So yeah, there you go, guys. It's the Brewmaster. It's one of those funny things. I think for people that have been playing, BFA, they're going to be aware of how powerful the Brewmaster is and have a really good impression of it. I think certainly for people that, haven't been playing the game all that much recently, that you can look at Brewmaster and be a bit weirded out by it, you kind of go, this seems like a weird tank, like drinking brews and smashing kegs. I don't know. I don't really know if this is for me. But I can tell you for sure that it absolutely is. This is an extremely fun tank, an extremely potent tank. And yeah, this is one that I think you'll have an absolute blast playing. Next up, let's talk about Mistweaver. This is the healing spec for the monks. And I think for Mistweaver, their biggest strength is also, in my opinion, their biggest weakness, which is that they are a very, very simple healer to play. And they have very much on-demand healing. Whenever you want to heal somebody, whereas other healers might have some ramp up, they have to wait for cooldowns. The Mistweaver, pretty much at any point, can just start churning out some really powerful healing and top people up exactly when you want. The good side of this is that they're a really easy healer to pick up and dive into difficult content, and you're always going to have an answer on hand whenever stuff starts going down. The bad side of this, though, and unfortunately I do have to say this, and you guys can take it as you want, like whatever. If you love Mistweaver, then go for it. More power to you. But I'm just going to tell you my opinion, and you can value it however you want to value it. But for me, the bad side of Mistweaver is that I do find its healing to be a little bit boring, especially in raid scenarios where really the utility, and I'm going to touch on that next, but the utility that makes Mistweaver really shine in PvP and in dungeons, that utility is not so good in the raid, and it's more so about the healing. And there, I find them to be, honestly, quite boring. And for the most part, they kind of play themselves, right? You're renewing Mist, your heal over time, it's a smart heal, right? It's going to jump to injured targets. Whenever someone reaches full health, it will jump to a new target. Your Essence Font, you just channel it. It does its AoE healing. And then you just heal people with Vivify that need some direct healing. I know I'm oversimplifying here a little bit, but if I was to overcomplicate it, whereas with some of the other specs, I could make it very complicated. I don't think you can make it all that complicated with the Mistweaver. The flagship new ability for the Mistweaver monks in Shadowlands is Invoke Yu'lon, the Jade Serpent. This is a big 3-minute cooldown. You summon an effigy of Yu'lon, the Jade Serpent, for 25 seconds, and she's going to hang out and heal your teammates with her Soothing Breath ability. On top of that, she's got a pretty cool passive where when you do your Enveloping Mist heal, she's also going to do like her own mini version of Enveloping Mist. So there is a little bit of gameplay there for sure. You can plan out some Enveloping Mist casts during Yu'lon to get some extra healing out of her too, and that can be pretty fun. And to be honest, just having another big cooldown, another big healing cooldown is really welcome for Mistweaver. This was something that was very much missing in BFA when I was playing Mistweaver. Only having Revival was very underwhelming. So having it, even though this is not the most exciting healing cooldown in the world, I think it is really nice just to have it. It gives you something else to do, to interact with in the raid, which is good, and another cooldown to rely on in PvP or in dungeons, which again is good. So it's a big, big win, I think, for the Mistweaver to have another healing cooldown coming baseline. On top of that, of course, compared to other healers, Mistweaver has a lot of mobility, and they have very, very good defensives as well. And this makes them very much stand out, I would say, in dungeons, where you're also bringing that monk utility of the Rings of Peace, Mystic Touch, leg sweeps, paralysis, all that good stuff. Yeah, you really stand out in dungeons, you really stand out in PvP where you can use those tools. I do feel, though, again, in the raids, those tools are not quite as useful, and the Mistweaver then slightly falls off there, I think, a bit as well. So yeah, that's the Mistweaver. I think it's a great beginner healer spec. I expect it to actually be quite powerful at the start of Shadowlands, with great on-demand healing that can react to nearly any situation. But I think while there's a good chance that they start strong in the raids, just like they did in BFA, right? They were very good in Uldir and BFA. I think they'll be very good in Castle Nathria in Shadowlands. I think there is a risk in the raids, though, that they may be a little bit boring and that they could fall off a bit in raiding as the expansion goes on. So do just bear that in mind. Finally then, let's talk about the Windwalker monks. And I don't know, this is a weird spec to talk about. This really is. Because the impressions that I get from playing Windwalker, I have an absolutely wonderful time. I really enjoy playing this spec. Yet when you talk to Windwalkers and when you see Windwalkers talk about their spec, I don't know if it's just this real sense of masochism. They just seem to really, really hate themselves and hate their spec. And Windwalkers, more than any other spec, I feel, enjoys telling you about how terrible their spec is and how much it sucks, which is kind of bizarre. It's kind of bizarre. I certainly think there's a lot of, in BFA, there was a lot of truth to that. in the raid scenarios, right? They were decent-ish in Uldir. But for the other raid tiers, definitely they're pretty terrible. Like in this current raid tier in Nyalotha, absolutely terrible spec. There's no question about that. However, at the same time, I think that Windwalker has been a decent spec in Mythic Plus Dungeons, and it's been a decent spec for PvP for most of the expansion. You know, that's where their strengths tend to lie a little bit more. It's kind of like the Mistweaver in that sense. Very much like the Mistweaver, actually, where Dungeons and PvP, that's where, you know, their strengths of mobility and defensives start to come through and to shine, and the monk utility starts to shine. Especially so, and this is not something really under the spec's control, but especially seeing that the Brewmaster tank was the best tank for nearly all of BFA, and that was bringing monk utility to raids. Yeah, it's just kind of a design problem there, you know, for Blizzard, which is that the Brewmaster monks bringing the monk utility, that sort of squeezed out the other monk specs even more from raid scenarios. Another design problem that has existed for Windwalker monk that is luckily getting slightly better in Shadowlands has been this sort of weird comparison with Havoc Demon Hunter. I don't know what Blizzard was exactly thinking, but Havoc Demon Hunter really fills a lot of the same roles that Windwalker does, and it's an unfavorable comparison for Windwalker, or historically it has been, where both specs are very mobile, but, you know, Fell Rush is like roll, but better. Both specs were extremely survivable, and that is where the good news is, because whereas you as the Windwalker monk are continuing to be very survivable and have lots and lots of defensive cooldowns, you know, having Fortifying Brew baseline now, alongside your Touch of Karma, alongside, you know, talenting into Dampen Harm, for example. That's 3 major defensive cooldowns. The Demon Hunter is really getting nerfed in that regard, and I think that is where you can shine even more. And then again, both specs bring this sort of consistent on-demand burst AoE damage. So yeah, it's been a little bit weird for the Windwalker in that regard, especially with Brewmasters being there, whereas Vengeance Demon Hunters weren't really there. So the Havoc Demon Hunter utility that they were bringing, well, that was the only place to really get it, whereas the Windwalkers had to compete not only with Mistweavers, but really both of them were very much competing with Brewmaster. So that stuff has been a little bit rough. Some good news for Shadowlands, though, and I didn't actually mention this with the other monk specs, but Touch of Death has been reworked. It's now a baseline thing for all monk specs, and it's very simply just this big old cooldown that just does a massive chunk of damage to elite mobs, or just instantly kills normal mobs that have less health than you. So it's a really, really fun ability, actually, for some world questing, and a very powerful little bonus burst cooldown in dungeons. It's pretty awesome, actually. To make up for that, going baseline for all monk specs, whereas before, for the Windwalker, this was a cooldown that would store up your damage in single target and then pop that damage in single target. You now have a much better version, which is your Invoke, your signature ability for Windwalker in Shadowlands. Invoke Zwen, the White Tiger. You summon in Zwen for 24 seconds. He's going to hang out. He's going to do some damage and look badass. But the great thing is that every 4 seconds, he's going to then cleave all of your enemies nearby for 10% of the damage you dealt to the targets in the last 4 seconds, right? So he's just going to replicate some of the damage that you dealt. So this is rewarding for single target. This is rewarding for AoE. And yeah, it's doing this every 4 seconds for 24 seconds, every 2 minutes. It's pretty awesome, actually. It's pretty fantastic. So that works really, really well. Is that going to be enough to make Windwalker monks really stand out at the top level of Mythic rating? Well, no, I don't think so. But then again, that's the same for most melee specs in the game, right? Range specs just do much better in high-level Mythic rating than melee do. There's very, very few melee spots. I think it is unlikely at high-end stuff that Windwalker will see some play. But then again, most people don't play at high-end play, so it doesn't really matter there. But regardless, I think that the Windwalker is really going to shine in dungeons, and it's really going to shine in PvP. And I think being able to shine and really stand out from the crowd in 2 big areas of the game, that's enough to make this a really good spec, in my opinion. And also very fun for solo play. I think it's going to be really fun for Torghast as well. For me, that is more than enough to recommend this. I think it's a great spec. I really do. Although, like I said, if you are a main raider, if all you really are interested in is raiding, then Windwalker's probably not the spec for you. So there you go, guys. That's my look at the monk class in Shadowlands. Kind of to sum up the main points, I would say the Brewmaster monk is a really wonderful tank that's going to feel great in raids, feel it possibly even better in dungeons, has a great core rotation, a very relaxed form of active mitigation, and really thrives in kiting scenarios as well. It's really quite cool. The Mistweaver monk, I think, is a great beginner healer, though I think their complexity is a bit lacking in raiding, but they're going to be great in PvP and in dungeons where their utility, their mobility, their survivability really shines. And the same is true for the Windwalker monk, very much the same sort of strengths and weaknesses as the Mistweaver. Going to be great in dungeons, great in PvP, though it may struggle a bit to stand out above other specs in the raid. Though it is a very, very fun damage spec to play, in my opinion. As always, though, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comments. I try to read as many as I possibly can. And, of course, again, you can find the week auras. It's updated versions of the week auras on my Patreon page. Again, they're there for free if you want to grab them. And, yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.